What happens when the justice system closes a case before it ever truly opens? Because that is what this feels like. Not the end of a story, but the sudden removal of the one person who could have told it from the inside. A man accused of killing his own parents. A suspect who never reached trial. A defendant who never took the stand. Now confirmed dead, fatally beaten inside a jail cell, before a jury ever heard a single word. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And that confirmation did not come from a rumor, or a leak, or a late-night headline scrolling quietly across a screen. It came from the United States Attorney General. Just minutes ago. Pause on that for a second. Let it settle. The highest law enforcement authority in the country stepping forward to confirm that Nick Reiner is dead. Not released. Not transferred. Not awaiting proceedings. Dead. The man at the center of one of the most disturbing family homicide cases in recent memory will never face a courtroom. Never answer questions. Never confront the evidence. Never explain himself. And that alone should stop you. Because this story was supposed to move slowly. Methodically. Through hearings and motions and testimony. Instead, it collapsed inward. Violently. Inside a jail that was supposed to keep him alive long enough for the truth. Whatever that truth might be, to surface. Short sentences matter here. 2 parents. Dead. A son. Accused. A sister. The one who made the call. And now the accused himself. Gone. If this feels unresolved, that's because it is. If it feels like something important has been cut short, that's because it has. And if you're already asking yourself how a man charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder ended up beaten to death by fellow inmates before his case even reached a preliminary hearing, good. You should be. Because the moment Nick Reiner died, this case stopped being just about what happened inside a luxury Brentwood estate. It became a question about what happens inside our justice system when process is replaced by silence. Let's step back. Carefully. The initial facts were shocking enough. Reiner's parents, Reiner, 78, and Michelle, 70, found stabbed to death inside their $13.5 million Brentwood home. A neighborhood known for privacy, wealth, distance from the kind of violence that usually dominates headlines. Their son, Nick, 32, lived in the guest house on the property. Close enough to hear things. Close enough to know routines. Close enough to be there. He was arrested that same night. Charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. That alone set the narrative. But almost immediately, the story took on another layer. One that didn't sit comfortably. According to reports, the bodies were discovered by the Reiner's daughter, Romy, 27. And when she spoke to police, she allegedly warned them about a dangerous family member. Someone who, she said, should be a suspect. Think about that phrasing. Not grief-stricken confusion. Not uncertainty. Not, I don't know what happened. A warning. A designation. A direction. And from that moment forward, the story seemed to move with unsettling speed in one direction only. Nick was arrested. The public narrative hardened. Headlines followed. Speculation filled the gaps that official statements didn't. And then, before anything could slow down, before defense attorneys could speak, before evidence could be tested, before contradictions could be explored, Nick Reiner was placed behind bars. Alive. That distinction matters. Because incarceration carries an implicit promise. Not of comfort. Not of fairness. But of preservation. Of due process. Of the idea that punishment, if it comes, follows proof. And now he's dead. According to the Attorney General, Nick Reiner was fatally beaten by other inmates. That sentence raises more questions than it answers. Beaten how? Over how long? Where were the guards? Why him? And perhaps most unsettling of all, why now? It's tempting to rush forward. To assume motives. To assign meaning. To decide that this was either inevitable or deserved or random or tragic or all of the above. But resist that instinct. Because the most dangerous thing in a case like this is certainty without examination. Let's talk about timing. Nick Reiner was not convicted. He was not sentenced. He was not even tried. His death does not represent justice completed. It represents a process interrupted. And interruptions matter. Especially when they happen inside systems designed to prevent them. Jails are not supposed to be safe. No one pretends that. But they are supposed to be controlled. Violence may occur, but it is not supposed to erase defendants before the law has its say. When it does, something has gone wrong, structurally, procedurally, or both. And when the federal government feels compelled to confirm that death publicly, it suggests the stakes are already higher than they appear. Ask yourself this. How often does the Attorney General personally confirm the death of a pretrial detainee accused of a state-level crime? Not often. Which means this is not just about Nick Reiner. It's about exposure, about liability, about questions that cannot be ignored. Because once Nick Reiner died, the case against him effectively died too. No trial means no cross-examination, no sworn testimony, no opportunity to hear his version of events. Guilty or innocent, his voice is gone. And so is the chance to fully understand what happened inside that house. What happened between those walls, between those family members, between years of shared history that no police report can summarize. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because if Nick Reiner was guilty, then his death denies the victims' families and the public a full accounting. And if he wasn't, if there were complications, mitigating factors, or alternative explanations, then his death becomes something else entirely. Either way, silence benefits someone. Who? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the central tension of this entire case. You may already feel yourself forming an opinion. That's natural. The human brain seeks resolution. It wants to land somewhere solid. But this story resists that. Every time you think you've found firm ground, it shifts. Consider the setting again. A multi-million-dollar estate in Brentwood. Not an alley. Not a random burglary gone wrong. A controlled environment. Familiar faces. Family dynamics that outsiders rarely see clearly. And then consider the jail. Another controlled environment. Cameras. Protocols. Classifications. Systems designed to monitor, separate, intervene. And yet, in both places, violence occurred. In both places, people died. In both places, the full truth remains elusive. That parallel is hard to ignore. Now let's talk about language. Because language shapes perception. Fatally beaten by inmates. Passive construction. No names. No details. No acknowledgement of how something like that unfolds without intervention. It sounds clinical, almost distant. But beatings are not abstract. They are physical, loud, messy. They take time. They draw attention. Which means this wasn't a single moment. It was a sequence. A sequence that unfolded inside a facility staffed by trained personnel. A sequence that, according to the confirmation we have, ended with a dead man who had not yet been judged by a court of law. And already, pieces of the story don't quite align. Why was Nick Reiner housed where he was? Was he in protective custody? Was he classified as vulnerable? Was he isolated, or placed among inmates who knew exactly who he was and what he was accused of? Those details matter. They matter because jail violence is rarely random. It follows patterns, triggers, informal hierarchies, information flows. Someone always knows something before it happens. Someone hears something. Someone sees something. So when we're told that this happened, the immediate question is not just how, but whether it could have been prevented. And if it could have been prevented, why wasn't it? There's another layer here, and it's uncomfortable to sit with. Public reaction. When people accused of violent crimes are harmed in custody, the response is often muted, sometimes even celebratory, as if pretrial violence somehow substitutes for legal accountability. But that reaction ignores something fundamental. The justice system is not designed to mete out punishment through neglect or chaos. It's designed, at least in principle, to establish truth through process. When that process is short-circuited, everyone loses clarity, including the victims, including the public, including, ironically, the system itself. Because now, instead of one case, there are two. The murders at the Brentwood estate, and the death of Nick Reiner in custody. And those cases intersect in ways we are only beginning to understand. Already, questions are forming. About oversight. About jail conditions. About whether this was an act of spontaneous inmate violence or something more targeted. About why certain safeguards failed. And those questions are not going away. If anything, they are intensifying. Because the more you examine this story, the clearer it becomes that Nick Reiner's death didn't bring closure. It created a vacuum. One filled with speculation, doubt, and a growing sense that something essential has been lost. Information, context, the possibility of confrontation. And perhaps most troubling of all, accountability. In the minutes since the Attorney General's confirmation, narratives have already begun to harden. Some will frame this as inevitable, others as tragic, others as deserved. But none of those framings answer the underlying question. How did we get here? How did a case with this level of attention, this level of scrutiny, this level of institutional awareness, end with a dead defendant before the law could do what it claims to exist to do? That is not a minor procedural hiccup. That is a systemic failure, or at least the appearance of one. And appearances matter, especially when they involve life, death, and the credibility of the justice system itself. As we move forward, we are going to slow this story down. We are going to resist the urge to jump to conclusions. We are going to look carefully at timelines, decisions, language, and omissions. We are going to ask uncomfortable questions, not because they are easy, but because they are necessary. Because somewhere between a Brentwood estate and a jail cell, the truth fractured. It started with a phone call. Not an ordinary one, not a routine 911 call. One of those calls that immediately changes the trajectory of a life, or in this case, multiple lives. The kind of call that leaves echoes long after the line goes dead. Nick Reiner, 27, picked up the phone that Sunday evening. According to reports, she discovered the unthinkable. The bodies of her parents, Nick's father and mother, lying inside the family estate. But she didn't just report a crime scene. She added a warning, a name, a detail that would shape the investigation in ways no one could have anticipated. There's a dangerous family member, she allegedly told the responding officers. He should be a suspect. Think about that phrasing. The words carry weight, certainty, even authority. Not confusion, not uncertainty, not grief clouded by shock. Romy did not stumble over her words. She framed the narrative. She inserted direction where police procedure normally moves cautiously, systematically. And the police, trained to remain objective, had little choice but to act. The line between suggestion and accusation was razor thin, and by the time they arrived, the stage was set. Nick Reiner, 32, would be arrested that same night, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. A suspect, then a defendant, then a man whose life was about to collapse under scrutiny he hadn't yet had a chance to respond to. From the very first moments, this case was about timing, about who spoke first, whose story was heard, whose narrative would dominate the early record. And in those moments, Romy's call became far more than a notification. It became a catalyst. But let's pause and consider the dynamics here. The Reiners' estate was no ordinary house. Brentwood, Los Angeles. $13. $5 million. Security systems. Privacy. Expansive grounds. Nick lived in the guest house, close enough to hear movements, see patterns, understand routines. The physical proximity created layers of implication, but it also made the police question, did the suspect live there? Did he have knowledge of potential danger? Was he involved? And then there's the human element, the complexity of relationships that outsiders rarely grasp. Families are messy, layered. Subtle interactions, unspoken tensions, years of buried resentment or affection. Law enforcement arrives, trained to interpret evidence, to read behavior, to follow protocol. But what about emotion? What about context? Those are harder to measure, yet they matter immensely. The call itself, simple as it seems, a woman dialing a number, sets in motion a chain reaction that extends far beyond her line. Dispatch receives it, officers are dispatched, investigators begin piecing together what remains. Every word, every hesitation, every implied meaning is cataloged. In legal terms, it's preliminary, but in human terms, it's decisive. Because Romy's warning frames Nick before he's had a chance to defend himself. A dangerous family member. Should be a suspect. That phrasing will echo through police reports, media coverage, legal filings. And once it's out there, controlling the narrative becomes almost impossible. And yet, even in those initial hours, details remained murky. How long had her parents been dead? What exactly did she see? What did she witness that night? Was her statement the result of immediate observation, or something she pieced together after shock, fear, and grief? Those questions linger, and they matter. Police procedure in such high-profile cases is both methodical and cautious. They secure the scene. They canvass witnesses. They process evidence. But in this case, they also had a suspect already named, a potential motive framed in familial tension. That changes how officers approach the investigation. It changes the lens through which evidence is interpreted. Subtle biases, unintentional or otherwise, can shape the trajectory of the case long before a trial. And then there's the media. In a city like Los Angeles, with a story like this, word travels fast. The family's name, the estate's location, the wealth and prominence involved. All of it guarantees attention. Rumors form. Speculation circulates. In those first hours, before full statements are issued, before charges are formally filed, the narrative begins to crystallize in public perception. And once perception sets in, reversing it is nearly impossible. The legal machinery starts quietly but relentlessly. Investigators gather statements, examine the scene, compile preliminary reports. Nick Reiner is placed under arrest. That night, he becomes a suspect officially, formally, irrevocably. The weight of accusation now sits on him. And yet, at that point, he's alive, able to speak, able to tell his side, able to challenge assumptions. But life, as we now know, had other plans. The first domino falls when Nick is placed in custody. In theory, custody should protect him until due process can take its course. In practice, the protections are conditional. In practice, systems fail.